Welcome to Guerrilla Radio, recorded February 12th, 2022. While not content with the massive ecological damage created by land-based metals mining, industrial interests are now viewing the oceans of the world as the next frontier. Deep-sea mining, known too as seabed mining, is the next big thing, and we're told it will be a part of the solution to humanity's carbon pollution problem. Once again, technologists promise they'll fix the environmental problems they and modern society has created with technology, but not everyone is convinced. Julia Barnes is an environmental champion and award-winning filmmaker of the documentaries Sea of Life and Bright Green Lies. Julia is aligned now with an array of ocean defenders, contributing her talents to the efforts to kill deep-sea mining in the cradle. Welcome to the program, Julia.
Thanks so much for having me.
Well, it's my great pleasure, of course. Now, to begin with, Julia, can we just say, what is deep-sea mining?
Deep-sea mining is probably the biggest upcoming threat to the ocean. There are 3 forms of deep-sea mining that are currently being proposed. There's the extraction of polymetallic nodules from the abyssal plains region of the ocean. There's the extraction of cobalt-rich crusts from seamounts, and there's the extraction of polymetallic sulfides from hydrothermal vents. All 3 of these would be catastrophic for the organisms who inhabit those areas. The main form of mining that companies are gearing up for right now is the extraction of these polymetallic nodules. So that is the form of mining that could begin in less than 2 years. And that's where a lot of the focus of my work has been, because that's the one that's kind of the most urgent. So to give people a sense of what that type of mining might look like and what's at stake, polymetallic nodules are these rock-like formations that exist in these long, flat stretches of the deep sea floor that are known as the abyssal plains. So polymetallic nodules, they range in size anywhere from the size of pebbles to the size of potatoes. They are very porous, but they also contain metals that companies are interested in exploiting. Things like copper, nickel, cobalt, and manganese. And polymetallic nodules are often the only hard substrate that species can attach to in an otherwise very muddy and silty environment of the deep sea floor. So things like corals and sponges grow on polymetallic nodules, and species of coral in the deep sea can live to be up to 4,000 years old. There are species of sponges who can live up to 11,000 years old. So just really amazing, long-lived species. But then polymetallic nodules are also habitat for a lot of the other, myriad of organisms who exist in the abyssal plains, various types of fish, eels, octopus, sea cucumbers, just a wide range of different species who inhabit the deep sea depend on these. So the removal of polymetallic nodules would be quite detrimental for deep sea species, just in terms of the habitat loss. But on top of that, the deep sea is actually the largest active carbon sink on the planet. And polymetallic nodules do play a role in the carbon cycle as well. So they're home to communities of microbes that exist, within their porous structure of these polymetallic nodules in much greater concentration, much greater diversity than what exists in the surrounding seabed. And these microbes, through a redox reaction using some of the metals in polymetallic nodules, they pull carbon out of the surrounding seawater and help sequester it into the sediment beneath the nodules. So polymetallic nodules, they play a role in the carbon cycle. There have been some studies looking at the fact that they help regulate the pH of the deep sea environment. There's some exchange of metals and nutrients from these polymetallic nodules into the surrounding environment. So they really regulate the conditions that make the deep sea livable for all the other species. So even if there was a way to magically snap your fingers and transport polymetallic nodules to a ship on the surface without any of the attendant horrors that go along with mining, this would still be really detrimental to the deep sea in terms of this loss of key habitat and this loss of this function of the ocean's carbon cycle. Of course, the reality of mining is that it doesn't happen by magic, and there's this whole process involved.
So I would think from a miner's point of view that listening to what you've just said, and especially about the nodules on the seabed, we've seen many of us footage, and it kind of looks like the moon, and there doesn't seem to be a lot of life around, just a few rocks around. Hey, why don't I just drop some other material? We do artificial reefs and so forth. Have mining companies proposed that they could replace habitat that depends on the nodules, as you described, with some other inanimate objects? It sounds like maybe they can't.
I don't think anyone's proposing that. What the companies will do a lot of times in their PR material is talk about the deep sea as this lifeless desert, and don't worry, there's like nothing down there that we're going to disturb, so it doesn't matter.
It's the moon.
Exactly. And of course, that runs contrary to everything we now know about the deep sea. It's very biodiverse. Every time scientists go down there, they discover new species that were previously unknown to humans. There is life down there. But they haven't really proposed replacing these things because I think everyone knows that's not really possible. Polymetallic nodules are so complex. It's not just like this static object. It really is a whole kind of like biome in and of itself. And they don't come back on any kind of human time scale. They're incredibly slow growing. They grow at a rate of 10 millimeters per million years. So once you remove them, they're really not coming back.
Well, and it's also a bit of a misnomer to think that this activity only happens on the surface, in the deep bed surface anyway. I mean, you can explain all that to people, but when they see video that looks like a seeming wasteland, and they are told that the minerals brought up from that wasteland could actually reduce carbon emissions because they're being employed in various so-called green industries, it's a hard sell. But in your short video, Deep Sea Mining, What Could It Do to the Ocean? You put the lie to the fact that the effects are just on the seabed. Can you explain your video and how that process works and how the pollution created by the mining process doesn't happen just on the seabed?
Absolutely. Deep sea mining would really affect all layers of the ocean. And the way that they're planning on mining the deep sea involves deploying things that have been described as house-sized machines. These machines would move along the seafloor and extract the polymetallic nodules as well as whatever else is in their path. As they're moving along the seafloor, they're going to stir up a whole bunch of sediment, plumes of sediment that would, smother and bury organisms who can't get away. On top of that, they bring with them noise and light pollution and things that are just not good for species who are adapted to darkness and quiet and using sound and bioluminescence to communicate. So these machines would potentially be crushing polymetallic nodules at depth, then sending the crushed materials up through a riser pipe thousands of meters to a ship on the surface. On the ship, there would be some initial processing of the material. They would want to separate the polymetallic nodules, the parts that they want, from the kind of waste material, sediment, and various debris. And then they're going to be left with a lot of wastewater that they have to do something with. They have to get rid of it. There are some estimates that each mining vessel would produce 2 to 6 million cubic feet of sediment every day. That's equivalent to about 22,000 dump trucks full of sediment being produced per day per mining machine. And this has to be then dumped back into the ocean. So they're planning on pumping it down to an as yet undetermined depth, but somewhere in the mid-water zone. They will be pumping this fine particulate matter, this sediment that came up from the seafloor. And this would have a hugely problematic effect on fish, anyone who uses gills to breathe in the water. The fine particulate matter gets into their gills, it damages their ability to breathe, it could just murder a whole bunch of fish. And of course, there are currents in the water column that will take these plumes of sediment much farther than just around the mining area. The area that they're planning on mining is called the Clarion-Clipperton Zone. It's located between Hawaii and Mexico, and probably the area with the largest concentration of polymetallic nodules on the planet. And if all of the mines that are being planned for that area go ahead, this would be the largest contiguous mining area on the planet, as wide as the continental United States. There would be multiple mines operating at once, multiple machines and boats dumping sediments and storing up sediments. And this is a migratory area for a whole bunch of different species. So it's really the largest upcoming disaster that is being planned. I mean, an ecological disaster being planned for the ocean that could begin in as little as, less than 2 years.
Well, and you cover that in the film. And again, it's deep sea mining. What could it do to the ocean? You can find it on YouTube if you do a search for deep sea mining. Tell me more about the film. And one of the things that I found most inspiring or urgent or cogent, poignant in the film was comments made by John Horston of the Blue Planet Society, and he echoes what you just said. He said this is an emerging technology that promises massive ecological damage, but we're in a position to stop this technology from moving further now. We have a chance, as I said in the introduction, to kill this in the cradle.
Mm-hmm. We are at such a crucial time right now with deep sea mining because unlike so many other environmental issues, this actually hasn't started yet, at least not in international waters, not at scale. We do have the opportunity to stop it before it happens, and it's a very narrow time span right now. And when it comes to deep sea mining, this is an issue that most people simply have not heard of. Most people are not aware that this is even being planned. And I think when people hear those three words put together, deep sea mining, the initial reaction is kind of horror. Like, this does not sound like a good idea. And then the more research you do into it, you realize actually it's even worse than you thought. So I think this is a key moment, and we absolutely need to make more people aware that this issue is happening and really put up a resistance to it, because I think it can be stopped. We have this great opportunity. Let's do it, because if this goes ahead, the potential consequences are so much greater than what can be known. I mean, we don't know how bad things will be. We know it'll be bad, but I don't want to find out the consequences of this.
Well, and Horston says, quote, if ever there was a future problem that we can stop now, it's this. We don't need this. We don't need this deep sea mining, and it should be stopped. If you've just tuned in, you're listening to Guerrilla Radio. I'm speaking today with Julia Barnes. Julia is an environmental champion. She's an award-winning filmmaker. Her documentaries are The Sea of Life and Bright Green Lies. She's aligned right now with a large group of ocean defenders, an array, in this effort to bring deep sea mining into the consciousness of the greater public with the hopes of stopping this and stopping it now. Can you tell me, Julia, about some of your collaborators in this project and in this effort?
When I started making a film about deep sea mining, I kind of just wanted to put something together very quickly and educate people about this issue. And so I reached out to some of the groups that I knew were working on this. There are some really great organizations already. So Mining Watch Canada is doing great work around deep sea mining. Actually, there's a petition that they have out right now for Parliament. So if you're listening, definitely check that out and support that. They're calling for candidates to support a moratorium on deep sea mining. There's also the Deep Sea Mining Campaign happening out of Australia. There's various groups in the Pacific who are, resisting deep sea mining. So there's the Pacific Blue Line statement is a really good one, calling for a ban on deep sea mining. People can check that out and sign that as well. There's various civil society groups like in Tonga And there's an organization that myself and a bunch of friends just started called Deep Sea Defenders. So we're collaborating with people, and everybody's trying to do what they can to raise awareness about this issue and prevent it, hopefully, from going ahead.
Well, and it's not limited to the area in the Pacific that you mentioned, or Tonga, who you feature in the film. And I beg your pardon for the pronunciation, Pelenatita Kara of the Civil Society Forum of Tonga. The Pacific Network on Globalization is also featured. And you mentioned that in Papua New Guinea, Nautilus Minerals, a Canadian registered mining interest, was stopped in their efforts to get it going there. But they're moving along and trying to get similar things even here in Canada. I'm looking at a quite an old article in the Narwhal, that terrific online site, by Sonia Jind, and sorry, Sonia, about that pronunciation too. Her article is, "It's only a matter of time before deep sea mining comes to Canada, and we're not ready." She wrote that in March of 2019. Are you familiar with the article, Julia, and has anything happened to make us more ready since then?
I'm not too familiar with the article, although I have certainly spoken with people about the concern for deep sea mining coming to Canada. Right now, it seems like the way laws are set up within Canada is to disallow deep sea mining, like it would not be permitted under current circumstances. But if the International Seabed Authority goes ahead with making regulations for international waters, and if they are weaker than the regulations we have in Canada, that could potentially drive ours down, such that we have to allow mining to happen within Canada's economic exclusive zone. So that's definitely a fear that could happen if this whole industry gets underway. There's certainly lots of the types of environments undersea that companies would be interested in mining, like seamounts, hydrothermal vents, that kind of thing. So it's a huge concern for sure. That could potentially be an issue in the future.
And not very far west of us here on Vancouver Island, there's just such an area with the sea vents. You know how active, how seismically active it is just off of our west coast, a couple hundred miles. And that is an area that's been proposed as a marine protection area. This is covered in the Narwhal article too. And again, that's Sonia Jinden. That's the Narwhal, the whale.ca. If you're not familiar with the site, please go to it, folks. It's absolutely fantastic. It's a good article, as I say, but it's almost 3 years old. There's an area off of this island that has been dubbed the Deep Sea Oasis that they're trying to get protection for. But as of the writing of that article, that hadn't happened yet. But there are some successes down south of us here in Washington State and in Oregon. They've banned seabed mining off their coasts, but and they're trying in California too. How about locally? Does the British Columbia government, to your knowledge, have they brought forward any proposals to protect the deep sea bed off of our coast here?
Not that I'm aware of.
Yeah, in California, it's AB 1832, the Assembly Bill 1832, and there's a terrific article about that in the Mercury Times News down in the States, and they frame their article. It's written. The article is AB 18 Assembly Bill 1832 could protect California coast from contentious deep sea mining. But it's subtitled "Underwater Mineral and Metal Deposits Are Targeted by Clean Energy Industries." And this is the spin where we're going to be asked to sacrifice one thing for another. Do we sacrifice the moonscape that is the seabed, as the pictures show us, because we have to decarbonize? Never mention, of course, is these processing ships, these mining ships offshore. That must take a tremendous amount of energy to process all of these minerals and keep these ships running, and likely done with bunker fuel, the most polluting and carbon-intensive fuels that there are. Your award-winning film, you look quite far into this idea that these green-colored industries that try to pass them off as being beneficial. How does that play into this whole project of deep-sea mining?
Yeah, I mean, it was in the process of making that documentary that I first found out about deep-sea mining. And Bright Green Lies is an exploration of the sort of like technological industry that is promoting itself so much as being green and being a solution for the planet. So things like solar panels, wind turbines, electric cars, hydro, biomass, all that kind of stuff. And just really looking into the side of things that people don't necessarily see, the extraction dependence of these technologies and the whole process, like what goes into making them, and are they really as green as these marketing materials from these companies would like to say it is. And while I was sort of finishing up that film, I just came upon an article about deep sea mining and realized that, oh, the ocean is now becoming the next sacrifice zone, you know, in the name of this so-called green technology. It's completely a myth that we need electric cars in order to save the planet from climate change, for a number of reasons. I mean, one being that the manufacture of a vehicle is often where a lot of the emissions take place. So switching out the fuel tank for the battery is not really addressing the whole issue. But then on top of that, if we're talking about the environment and not just being hyper focused on climate, there are a whole host of issues that come along with car culture beyond just the emissions. The cars wipe out vast numbers of vertebrate and invertebrate animals every year. Roads fragment habitats. There's plenty of reasons to be opposing car culture beyond the fact that cars spew out emissions. And whether you have a traditional gas burning vehicle or an electric vehicle, it is predicated on this nasty process of extraction, manufacture, shipping the components all around the world. And when it comes to electric vehicles, whether they're getting the metals from the deep sea or from the lithium mines that are now being proposed and that companies are trying to push in, or the cobalt mines that are happening on land. It's all just really horrific stuff when you look into it. I think we need to be moving away from car culture as a whole and not thinking that each person should be driving around their individual vehicles. I mean, that's just something that's not going to be sustainable in the long term anyway. But the way that mining companies frame deep sea mining, they like to talk about it like it's a choice. Like, we can either mine on land and destroy rainforests and have human rights abuses and all these horrible things that come with mining on land, or we can mine the deep sea and it'll be so much better. And of course, there are things about deep sea mining that they leave out. Like, they rarely ever talk about how they will process the mined material, which is actually a process that I've looked into, and it involves either extremely high heat, so it would be a very emitting industry, or things like sulfuric acid. It's a nasty process in and of itself, the actual how do you separate out the metals from within these rocks. But the whole idea that it's deep sea mining versus land mining, and you can choose one or the other, it's such a false dichotomy, because there is no reason that we should think that just because they open up the deep sea for this new industry, that all of a sudden companies that are focused on mining on land are going to close down their operations. If the demand for these metals are growing as they predict, and if we're hyping up electric cars and going towards this mass production of vehicles, then we're likely going to see an expansion of mining on land as mining also expands into the deep sea. So it's not like you can just sub in one for the other. This is just a push towards mining culture, towards extractivism, towards this mindset that we can just take from the earth. I think it's key to understand that the deep sea is not ours to exploit. The UN defines the deep sea as the common heritage of mankind. And a lot of times when people speak about this, they will change the wording to humankind, to include women. Right. But I think this is still a really flawed premise. I don't think the deep sea belongs to us. I don't think polymetallic nodules are there for us to take. They belong to the deep sea itself and the species who live there. They have a role to play in the ocean.
Well, we're all Earthlings, even if we don't all live on the Earth's surface, but in the oceans of it, we are an aquatic planet after all. Well, there's a lot more I'd like to talk to you about, but we're fast running out of time, Julia. How do people find out more about this issue? How do you recommend they get involved?
People can look up the work that we're doing, Deep Sea Defenders on Facebook or Twitter. They can check out a lot of action ideas for how to get involved there. And definitely look up all of these other organizations that are doing work on deep sea mining: Blue Planet Society, Mining Watch Canada, the Deep Sea Mining Campaign, and the Pacific Blue Line Statement. That would be a great place to start.
And there have been victories. There have been victories to turn this around in various jurisdictions just south of us here in British Columbia, being a couple of them, and in the South Pacific as well. Well, thanks a lot, Julia, for coming on and telling us a little bit about this today, eh?
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. It was great talking to you.